Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I told myself it was only a plan, something controlled, something we had discussed in hushed voices late at night as if speaking too loudly would make it real. But plans feel very different when you're trapped between cool metal walls and someone else's warmth pressing into you. His friend, Daniel, smelled like cedar and something darker, his hand hovering at my waist as though asking permission he already knew I had given. And when his lips brushed mine, slow at first, testing my breath, betrayed me before my mind could catch up, turning shallow, loud, almost desperate in the tight silence of the elevator. The hum of cables above us felt louder than it should have, like the building itself was listening, judging. And when his mouth drifted from my lips to the side of my neck, I felt my knees soften in a way that terrified me because this wasn't supposed to feel real. It was supposed to feel like acting, like stepping into a role I could step out of just as easily. "Today we do it right," he whispered, and something in his tone made my chest tighten, not forceful, not demanding, just certain, and I realized I didn't know what right meant anymore. Not in the way my husband had described it, not in the way I had agreed to it. Because nothing about this moment felt theoretical. Then the elevator jolted softly, the doors sliding open too quickly, too suddenly, and there he was, my husband, standing in the hallway like he had been there the entire time, watching or waiting. I couldn't tell which, and my body froze, heat turning instantly to cold as guilt surged up my throat. But he didn't shout, didn't flinch, didn't even look surprised. He just stepped forward calmly, reached up, and adjusted my scarf like he was fixing something delicate, something his fingers brushing my skin as he murmured, almost gently, "Don't be scared," and in that moment, as Daniel's presence lingered behind me and my husband's eyes held mine with something unreadable, I realized I didn't know who I was supposed to be anymore, or whose plan this really was. His fingers lingered at the edge of my scarf a moment longer than necessary, smoothing the fabric against my collarbone as if grounding me, or perhaps reminding me exactly where I stood between them, between choices I thought I understood. Daniel stepped back just enough for space to exist again, but not enough for the warmth he'd left behind to fade, and I became acutely aware of how loud my breathing still was, how flushed my skin must look under the soft hallway lights, how neither man seemed in a hurry to break the moment. "You came early," I managed, my voice thinner than I intended, and my husband's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, something measured, controlled. "No," he said quietly, "I came exactly when I needed to." And that answer, so calm, so certain, settled into me in a way that made the earlier question unravel slightly. He hadn't stumbled into this. He had timed it, chosen it, which meant this had never been about losing control, not for him. Daniel's presence shifted behind me, not retreating, not advancing, just there, like a shadow that had learned how to breathe, and when my husband's eyes flicked briefly past me toward him, there was no anger, no jealousy. Only an unspoken understanding that made my chest tighten in a completely different way, something deeper than guilt, something closer to exposure. "You said you wanted to feel it," my husband continued, his voice softer now, "meant only for me, not imagine it, not plan it. Feel it." And suddenly I remembered those late-night conversations with sharper clarity, the way he had asked questions instead of giving instructions, the way he had watched my reactions more than my words. As if he had been studying me rather than the idea itself, I swallowed, realizing the first truth I had been avoiding. This wasn't his fantasy alone. It had grown out of something in me I hadn't fully named yet, but then a new uncertainty crept in. Colder, sharper, if he had orchestrated this moment so precisely, what exactly was he expecting to see now? My hesitation, my desire, or something else entirely? And more unsettling still, what would happen if I gave the wrong answer without saying a single word? I could feel the space between us shrinking again, not physically at first, but in the way silence thickened, in the way both of them seemed to wait, not for a decision spoken out loud, but for something subtler, something that would show itself in how I breathed, how I moved, how I chose to stand. My husband's hand dropped slowly from my scarf, but the absence of his touch felt louder than the contact itself, like a signal passed between us, and behind me, Daniel shifted just enough that the back of his hand brushed mine. Accidental or intentional, I couldn't tell anymore, and that uncertainty made everything sharper, more dangerous. I became hyper-aware of my body, of the heat still lingering at my neck where his lips had been moments ago, of the way my pulse betrayed me, fast and unsteady, as if answering a question I hadn't consciously agreed to. This is what he meant, I realized. My husband hadn't wanted a performance, hadn't wanted me to follow a script. They had both been waiting for the moment when I stopped pretending this was controlled. "You can step away," my husband said quietly, not as a command, not even as a suggestion, but as an option placed gently in front of me, and that made it worse. Because now the weight of everything rested entirely on me. No excuses, no momentum to hide behind. I glanced at him, searching his face for something definitive, approval, warning, anything, but his expression remained composed, almost curious, as though he were watching a truth unfold rather than forcing it into existence. Behind me, Daniel's breath was steady, close enough that I could feel it against the back of my neck, and when his fingers finally, carefully, touched my wrist, they didn't pull, didn't guide. They simply stayed there, waiting. The hallway felt too narrow, the air too warm, and my thoughts began to loop over themselves. If I moved forward, I chose one kind of honesty. If I stayed still, I chose another. But what terrified me most was the realization that either choice would reveal something I could never take back, and then a new question surfaced, quieter, but far more unsettling than the last. Was this really about what I wanted, or had I already been shaped by what they wanted me to discover? I didn't move, not forward, not away, and somehow that stillness became my answer, because in that suspended second I understood the truth I'd been circling. This wasn't something they had planted inside me, it was something they had uncovered, patiently, deliberately, until I couldn't pretend it wasn't there. The warmth at my wrist, the echo of breath at my neck, the quiet, unwavering presence in front of me, it all sharpened into a single, undeniable awareness that whatever I chose now belonged to me, not to the plan, not to their expectations. My husband's eyes held mine longer this time, and something in them shifted, not approval, not possession, but recognition, as if he had just seen me arrive somewhere I hadn't realized I was going. And that look made my chest tighten more than anything else, because it meant he understood me in a way I wasn't sure I understood myself. Behind me, Daniel's hand remained light but certain, no longer hesitant, as though my stillness had given him permission without a word, and I felt the smallest pull, not enough to move me, just enough to remind me that I could. The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable, charged with a kind of awareness that made every breath feel intentional, every glance loaded. And when I finally looked away from my husband, just for a moment, it felt like crossing a line that hadn't existed seconds ago. "So this is where we are," I whispered, more to myself than to either of them. But my husband heard it. Of course he did, and his response came softer than I expected, almost thoughtful. "No," he said, his gaze steady. "This is where you decide if we go further." And the way he said we sent a ripple through me. This wasn't separation. It wasn't distance. It was something else entirely, something that bound the moment tighter instead of breaking it apart. Anticipation settled in, not rushed, not urgent, but inevitable, like standing at the edge of something you know you're going to step into even if you don't yet know how. And as Daniel's fingers shifted slightly against my wrist and my husband's eyes didn't leave mine, a single thought rose above the rest, clearer than any doubt. If I moved now, it wouldn't just change this moment. It would redefine all of us in ways none of us could fully predict. The moment stretched so tightly it felt like it might snap, and I realized with a quiet, rising panic that I was no longer reacting, I was choosing, even in my hesitation, even in my stillness. Daniel's fingers shifted from my wrist to my hand, slowly, deliberately, as if giving me time to pull away, but I didn't, and that small non-movement echoed louder than anything I could have said, sending a flicker of something unreadable across my husband's face, something deeper than approval, closer to fascination. My breath caught as Daniel stepped closer, not enough to trap me, just enough that I could feel the heat of him again, that same warmth from the elevator returning like a memory my body hadn't let go of, and for a second, just a second, I leaned back without meaning to, my shoulder brushing his chest, and the contact sent a sharp, electric awareness through me that made my eyes close briefly before I could stop myself. This is the edge, I thought, the exact point where imagination turns into something real, irreversible, and yet instead of fear stopping me, it tangled with something else, curiosity, maybe even desire, but not the simple kind, not the kind I could easily name or justify. When I opened my eyes again, my husband was still watching, unblinking, present in a way that made everything feel more intense, not less, and I realized that this wasn't about being pulled away from him, it was about being seen by him in a way I never had been before. Completely unfiltered. "You can still stop," he said quietly, but there was something different in his tone now, something heavier, as if the words carried consequences he wouldn't take back, and that warning, because it was a warning now, made my chest tighten, behind me. Daniel's hand lifted slightly, brushing along my arm in a way that wasn't possessive, wasn't rushed, but undeniably intentional, and my body responded before my thoughts could organize themselves. A small intake of breath, a subtle shift that brought me closer to him again without fully committing. Everything became fragments, his breath, my husband's gaze, the quiet hum of the hallway lights, and in that suspended, fragile second, I felt the full weight of the choice pressing down on me. Because if I crossed this line, even by the smallest step, I wouldn't just be exploring something new, I would be revealing something I might never be able to hide again, even from myself. The air felt heavier now, like every second carried weight, and I could sense something approaching, not an action, not a clear turning point, but an emotional threshold that all three of us were standing on without naming it. Daniel's presence behind me had shifted from tentative to certain, his hand no longer testing, but resting with quiet confidence against my arm, while my husband in front of me seemed more still than ever, yet somehow more involved. His gaze no longer just observing but holding me there, anchoring me in the moment even as everything inside me pulled in opposite directions. I realized then that the tension wasn't just between the two men, it was inside me, splitting me into versions of myself that couldn't fully exist at the same time, the one who wanted to turn forward, to return to something familiar, safe, defined, and the one who was already leaning into the unknown. Drawn by something I couldn't reduce to a simple explanation, my breath came slower now. Deeper, as if my body had accepted the intensity instead of resisting it, and when Daniel's fingers traced slightly upward, still measured, still giving me space to stop, I felt a sharp flicker of hesitation rise, but it didn't stop me. It only made the moment more vivid, more real. "Look at me," my husband said softly, and I did, immediately, instinctively, as though that connection mattered more than anything else, and in his eyes I didn't see distance or loss, I saw presence, something deliberate, almost intimate in its own way, and that realization hit harder than anything physical could have, because it meant this wasn't breaking us, it was transforming something between us into a shape I didn't yet understand. The silence stretched again, but now it felt like a question waiting to be answered, not by words, but by truth, and I became painfully aware that whatever I did next would define not just the moment, but the meaning behind it. My heart pounded. Not from fear alone. Not from desire alone, but from the collision of both, and as I stood there, suspended between staying and stepping forward, a final, unavoidable question rose to the surface, clearer than anything before it. If I let myself cross this line completely, am I choosing them or finally choosing the version of myself I've been too afraid to face? The question didn't linger, it settled, heavy and undeniable, and in the quiet that followed, I understood that there was no separating the two anymore, no clean line between choosing them and choosing myself. Because the truth I had been circling finally surfaced with a clarity that almost steadied me. I wasn't being pulled into this. I was stepping into it, fully aware, fully present. My hand shifted in Daniel's without resistance, not clinging, not retreating, just accepting the contact as real. And at the same time, my eyes stayed locked on my husband's, because that connection, steady, unbroken, mattered just as much, anchoring me even as I moved closer to the edge of something undefined. A subtle change passed between them. Something silent but unmistakable, like an agreement being fulfilled rather than initiated, and for the first time, the tension that had been building didn't feel like pressure. It felt like release, not explosive, but controlled, intentional. I took a small step, barely noticeable, but enough to dissolve the last illusion of stillness, and in that movement, the answer revealed itself. I wasn't losing anything. I was allowing a part of myself that had always existed, quiet, hidden, carefully contained, to finally take shape in the open. My husband exhaled slowly, his expression softening in a way that held both intensity and something almost reassuring, and when he stepped closer, closing the distance just enough that I could feel his presence as strongly as Daniel's behind me, it created a strange, fragile balance, one that shouldn't have made sense, but somehow did. No words followed, none were needed, because the shift had already happened, the question already answered, not perfectly, not without consequence, but honestly. And yet, even as the moment settled into something real, something chosen, I could feel another layer waiting beneath it, something not yet explored, not yet understood, because this wasn't an ending, not even close. It was only the first time I had stopped pretending I didn't want to know where this could lead, and as their presence remained around me, steady and unbroken, a quieter thought lingered just beneath the surface. Now that I've stepped into this truth, how far am I willing to follow it when there's no plan left to guide me?